Good morning, Gideon. Today we begin Siman Sadik Hay. As per the syllabus put forth by Laman Yilmadun, their intention was to learn the laws of Tzadik Hay before we go to Tzadik Daled. Tzadik Daled, as we already began last week, discusses putting a dairy spoon into a meat pot and reverse. We started that a little bit last week already. And at some point in Tzadik Daled, it's Hey, I think, if I remember correctly, there's a principle of, we'll call it in English. I was trying to think of a good translation, like a shorthand translation. I think the way to do it is secondhand flavor. The halacha of secondhand flavor is going to come up in middle of Tzadik Daled, whilst the main principle of how secondhand flavor works is going to be in Tzadik Hay. So they therefore felt it's best if we learn Tzadik Hay first, so we understand the principle of secondhand flavor, and then go back to Tzadik Daled, where that principle comes up in the cases of putting a ladle, the wrong ladle into the wrong pot. That's essentially the thinking. All right, so we're going to follow their path. So what is this secondhand flavor? That is the subject of this week's Siman. Even though the content is longer, but it's not going to be longer to learn because some of the later, once the principle is established and the principle is understood, it's going to be easy to flow through the entire Siman because you understand what is going on, why these questions coming up, and what the disputes are, and what the Shulchan Aruch is not mentioning that's in the background. That's kind of what we're going to do today, is to give the principle and the background behind what the Shulchan Aruch isn't saying, so you understand where the Shulchan Aruch is coming from. Which, by the way, just so we understand, it's the way Shulchan Aruch is supposed to be learned. I don't think I've ever mentioned this, but the Shulchan Aruch is, funnily enough, kind of like Rambam, actually. Not really learned the way the author intended it to be learned. Right? Rambam thinks that the Rebbe actually is learned the way the author intended. The author intended, Rambam writes in his introduction, his intention was, you read Chumash and then you read my book and that's it. In yeshivas, it's not learned that way. In yeshivas, it's learned like they select one passage and they unpack it in great depth. That was not the Rambam's intention, how you learn it. His intention was, read Chumash and then read my entire book from beginning to end. In a cursory way. That was his intention. Anyway, the Rebbe brought that back. Now, the Shulchan Aruch is also not meant to be learned the way we're learning it. The way the author intended it to be learned was as follows. He wrote a book called Beis Yosef. Beis Yosef is a commentary to the Torah. The Torah is a code that predates the Shulchan Aruch by almost a century, maybe even more than a century, actually, much more than a century, 2 centuries even, right? Because it's the Rosh Hashanah. So it's 2 centuries between the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah being the first code. Now, the Mechaber, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, wrote a commentary on the Torah called Beis Yosef. That's why the Mechaber, Rabbi Yosef Karo, is often referred to as Bet Yosef, because that's his primary work, is actually the Beis Yosef. And the Beis Yosef is essentially an extremely long dissertation on every single halacha, taking you from the Gemara and all the various different opinions until his day. And then he gives us a conclusion based on all of that. Sometimes supporting the Torah's position, sometimes disagreeing with the Torah's position.
The Torah's position?
The Torah, yeah. The Torah being the code that predates him, that he's commenting on. I don't want to do a whole history of halacha. You can do this, check out the series we did online where I explain all of this. But what I wanted to share is like this. So the Beis Yosef is really the Rabbi Yosef Karo primary work of halacha, in which he gives you his thinking, quotes the Gemaras. Like, you almost don't even need to learn the Gemaras when you're learning the Torah with the Beis Yosef, because the Beis Yosef quotes all the relevant passages in the Gemara. He'll quote all of the relevant commentaries post-Gemara until his day. He'll literally quote them in full, and then he'll give his analysis and his conclusion. Now, the Shulchan Aruch is meant to be a shorthand abbreviation of his conclusions. So what he's expecting you to do is learn the entire Beis Yosef, and then the Shulchan Aruch is very brief, just the shorthand conclusions after giving you the whole Beis Yosef background. And get this, it was meant to be learned every 30 days. So if you only learn the Shulchan Aruch, no Rama, no Shaktaz, no commentary, nothing, you just learn the Shulchan Aruch itself, it's not a lot. It could be one booklet, the whole Shulchan Aruch, right? And because you already have the background of the Beis Yosef, you just need to review the conclusions. So he gave you a shorthand little manual and said, review this every 30 days. every 30 days, finish the entire Shulchan Aruch. And that way, all the halacha will be memorized in your head. You already have the background from the Beis Yosef. And every time you read my little synopsis, you'll remember everything we discussed in the Beis Yosef. Right? And I'm saying this because we're going to be giving you background now that's not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. And for the the first time student, it's like, well, why isn't the Shulchan Aruch telling me all this background? The answer is he did tell you all this background. You just didn't learn it. It was in the Beis Yosef. He gave you all this background already, and he's expecting you already to know it when you come to the Shulchan Aruch, which is going to be the shorthand conclusions. Okay, so this kind of explains our system of doing intro first and then reading the Shulchan Aruch later, even though a lot of times the stuff in the intro is not mentioned anywhere in the Shulchan Aruch, but it undergirds the Shulchan Aruch's conclusions. Okay. In fact, one of the earliest printings of any Jewish books is the Shulchan Aruch, because Shulchan Aruch was published around the time that the printing press became a thing, which is one of the reasons why it became so popular, because it was printed. And one of the earliest printings is like pocket-sized Shulchan Aruch, because it has no commentary on the side, no Rama. It's just the text of Shulchan Aruch. It's a little booklet form, and it says on the front cover, for the traveler who wants to be able to follow the path of learning it every 30 days. So you're traveling, you can't carry your whole Shulchan Aruch, so it gives a little pamphlet. One of the earliest printings of the Shulchan Aruch was that, which means the program of actually learning it for 30 days was so popular that the printers decided it was worthwhile printing a travel version.
Is that all like Rashi Tevis?
No.
It's like actual like
the whole Shulchan Aruch laid out,
really?
But just in a small booklet, no commentaries. If it's no commentaries on the side, it's not that big. It's maybe 100 pages, 200 pages, maybe, but it's like in booklet form. It's one of the earliest printings.
This is not the Ramah. This is just the Shulchan.
Without Ramah, without Shach, without Taz. It's before the Ramah, probably before the Ramah even wrote his glosses. Certainly before the Shach and Taz are born. Right, so it's just the text of Shulchan Aruch. So it's for the person who wants to follow the program of reviewing it every 30 days. So they printed a like travel paperback travel version. Anyway, all right. So today we're going to do introduction, background to Siman Tzaddik, understanding the principle, what's behind the principle, and then once we read the Shulchan Aruch and you see the disagreements between the Ramah and the Mechaber, we'll understand where they're coming from. So the principle is what's known as, again, I'm using the word in English, secondhand flavor. The literal words that the Gemara uses is the original words is as follows: Noisen tam bar noisen kam, which means giver of flavor, son of a giver of flavor. So second degree giver of flavor. In shorthand, not, bar, not. That's the shorthand as it's referred to by anyone learning the Shulchan Aruch. Not, nun tes, stands for noisen tam, giver of flavor. Bar, Aramaic for son of. Not, nun tes, noisen tam, giver of flavor. So what's the meaning of this? And what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says like this. Fish literally means, the Gemara term is sha'alu b'karda, that have been come up on a plate, right? So they were taken from wherever they were cooked, this fish, so it's parve, and then while it's still hot, it was placed onto a meat dish that was used within the last 24 hours. So now you have noisen tam number one. You have giver of flavor number one. The plate, which is meat, is now giving it to. No, sorry. You have. I'm sorry. You have giver of flavor number two, because one is from the meat itself into the dish within the last 24 hours, and number two is from the dish into the fish.
But again, that's going to depend on what kind of vessel you're using.
Okay, let's
not going to be universal.
Put that aside for now.
Right?
It is pretty much universal in terms of, right? We had last week, maybe someone wanted to make earthenware different, but it pretty much is universal, right? Mm-hmm. So again, you have a hot part of a dish, you have a hot part of a food, your fish, which is put onto a hot meat dish that was used in the last 24 hours. So that fish absorbs meat flavor from the dish, but it's not directly from the meat. It's second degree, because the meat goes from the flavor went from the meat into the dish, and then that's number one, and then number two, from the dish into the fish. Right, so it's second degree flavor. It's flavor, son of flavor. Following? Yeah. Now says the Gemara, it's a machlokes Rav and Shmuel, but the conclusion is that you may eat that fish with cheese. That's the conclusion. Why? Because not bar not. It's nice and tam bar nice and tam. What's the rationale? The rationale is as follows. We've been learning this principle ever since the beginning of tam ki'ikr. The flavor is as if the item itself is there. So even if it's all gone, the meat's all gone, but the only thing that's left is the flavor of the meat. That flavor is treated as if the meat itself is there, and you require 60 to the ratio or nullification of that flavor. Right? Not bar not puts a limitation on that and says, yes, tam ki'ikr, it's indeed true that the flavor itself is as if the item itself is there, but not if it's been weakened because it's gone through 2 degrees of absorption. I should say 2 degrees of absorption and exfoliation. 1 absorbed into the dish and then removed from the dish. That's 1 absorption and 2nd exfoliation. And number 2, into the fish. And then the fish, I would have to give it off into the next thing. So if I had that fish with cheese, to assume that that's not kosher would mean that the flavor is still there, having gone into a dish, out of a dish, into the fish, out of the fish, into the cheese. That's already too far. Tam kolosh, the flavor is too weakened to say tam ki'ikr. Clear? That's the inherent principle from the Gemara. Is this clear so far? Okay. Before we go further into the parts that are going to be relevant to the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah itself, which is going to be a machlokes on exactly when not bar not applies, because that's, remember, the scenario that the Gemara gave us. The scenario the Gemara gave us is hot parve fish cooked in a parve pot that was then put onto a dish that was fleshik absorbed in the last 24 hours. It was not cooked in a fleshik dish. It was just placed while still hot on a fleshik dish. That was the case the Gemara gave us. Okay, that's the case the Gemara told us for not bar not. Flavor, son of flavor. Meat goes into dish, out of dish, into fish, out of fish, too far. All right. So before we get further into the limitations or how far we can use this principle of not bar not, some more background not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch directly, which is the case of the Shulchan Aruch, the case of the Gemara was where part of the fish, which in and of itself, of course, is kosher, placed onto a fleshik dish. Flesh, meat, is also in and of itself kosher. Right? We had this already earlier with the difference between basar b'chalav, milk and meat, versus other prohibitions. Milk and meat is the prohibition only happens in their intermingling. Until such time that they intermingle, they aren't kosher. They are totally kosher to begin with. There's no problem, right? Which is why we said chanan. Right? The reason why chanan is by basar b'chalav, in that case, it turns out to be more stringent because the meat didn't absorb non-kosher flavor when it absorbed milk.
It was just attached to it.
It's just the attachment that becomes not kosher, and because the mixture becomes not kosher, the whole thing becomes not kosher, right? Yes, as opposed to other non-kosher stuff. So if a piece of meat absorbs non-kosher flavor, right? So it's only going to be non-kosher to the degree that it contains non-kosher flavor. If you don't say chanan by other yisurim. Yeah. So over here, it's a similar thing, but the other way. Let's imagine, how would you play out not bar not in non-kosher? What do you mean? So the same scenario the Gemara gave us. Hot piece of fish, but now it's not put on a fleshik dish. It's put on a treifa dish. It's put on a dish that was used in the last 24 hours for non-kosher food.
Is it going to matter if it's hot or cold? Like
Let's get to that in a second. Let's put them down the principle before we add variables, right? So we take part of a piece of fish that's hot, and I put it onto a dish that was used in the last 24 hours for non-kosher meat.
Now we actually there's an inherent isser now.
There's an inherent isser.
Yeah.
If I take that fish, so now I can't eat that fish for sure not, right? Because it absorbed from a non-kosher. That's not 2 degree separation. That's 1 degree. It went from the dish into the fish. Okay, I can't eat the fish for sure
This
not.
is not by not, or is this kavush kamavushal?
No kavush kavush, not by not. It doesn't sit there for 24 hours.
fine.
That would be
And it's
kosher.
about a non-kosher dish, but if it was a non-kosher dish that was used after 24 hours,
It
that
was
would be okay?
non-kosher dish used within the last 24 hours. Right now, it's perfectly clean. It's only the flavor of non-kosher that's in that dish, right?
Yeah.
So now the fish absorbs from that flavor because it's hot. Yeah. Now, can I eat? Now, if I put that fish into another stew, would I then say that the non-kosher flavor that the fish absorbed from that non-kosher dish now transfers to that other dish? That would be not barnat, right?
Oh,
One,
Gotcha.
yes, you follow the question?
I follow the question. I just don't understand the logic because if we're saying that batal b'shishi in the previous,
There's no batal b'shishim here. You're adding other variables. The transference happened. There's no batal b'shishim. Don't throw other variables. Let's understand the principle. We'll put other variables in a minute, but first understand the principle. So assuming that the transference actually happened, the only thing here is that it's a second degree. Like in other words, you keep on asking me whether the transference happened from the non-kosher to the fish. It did. Under all rules, it happened. Now the question is, will that non-kosher flavor that's absorbed in the fish now be transferred to another dish that the fish goes into? That's the question. Of course, if there are other variables, if it was first batal b'shishim, that's not going to happen, right? You're adding other variables we already learned. Now we're learning this principle of not barnat, right? So assuming that the fish did absorb non-kosher flavor, so that fish is non-kosher, does it then have the power to make the next thing non-kosher? Or do I say not barnat? It's already flavor in front of, it's 2 degrees removed, it's not going to transfer to the next thing. Like I said by milk and meat, right? The fish, hot fish put onto a meat dish, it absorbed meat flavor, right? But nonetheless, I can eat that cheese with fish. I can eat that fish with cheese.
There's no inherent.
Because the cheese, the meat flavor that's in the fish isn't strong enough to go to the cheese because it itself wasn't absorbed from meat. It was absorbed from a pot that absorbed from meat. Right? That's not barnat. That's the leniency of not barnat is that fish that was put onto a hot meat plate can then be eaten with cheese. Why? Because the meat flavor it absorbed is 2 degrees removed. It didn't absorb directly from the meat. It absorbed from a dish that absorbed from meat.
We're not going to apply the stringency of Hanan Behetzer. Like everyone's saying, we're not like this. That's we're kind of like.
Okay, I don't want to introduce because there is a whole machlekes in Achronim whether the machlekes here is linked to Hanan or not. There's such a machlekes, and I kind of alluded to it, which you're picking up on, and that's correct. But Lav Dafka is a bit agree with that, whether or not the Hanan argument and the not argument are linked, but it's possible that they are. Right? But either way, in principle, you are correct because the leniency of not barnat by basar b'chalav is because everything was kosher. At no point did the fish absorb. At no point was shame isser. Let's use the term shame isser. The designation of prohibition was never applied to this fish. The designation of meat was, at least in second degree, because it absorbed meat from a dish that earlier absorbed meat. So the fish maybe absorbed very weak flavor meat, but at no point did this fish get designated as prohibited. And therefore, because the flavor is a kosher flavor, B, it's so weak, because it went from a meat to a dish, and from a dish to the fish, then this fish can be eaten with cheese, because the meat flavor is A, kosher, and weakened.
Depends if you hold Hanan.
That's what you just mentioned. So that's why I said there is an achronim which link the machlekes of Hanan to the question of not barnat. There are such achronim, and I alluded to that, but for now, we'll leave it alone. But you are correct that there are those who link it to Hanan. Right? Because again, the principle is really the same. Because the principle starts from the fact that inherently basar b'chalav is kosher. And nothing here, not the fish, not the meat, not the dish, nothing here has the designation of non-kosher. It's just a question of, is the flavor of the meat so strong that after having gone into a dish, coming out of the dish into the fish, does it then have the power to go out of the fish into the cheese? To which we say, no, it's too far. Clear?
to learn about it.
No, what I mean, where we're missing here. It's important to understand this.
We got a lot of shilas. It's not the time.
No, I'm not just about how the halach will be applied. If that's your shilas, shelf that to next week.
Not
That's a Wednesday.
I understand the
Principle.
concept. Yeah, this.
That's it. So the application of this principle is what we're going to be learning this week, right? But I want to understand the principle. Everything we're going to be learning is, okay, when do I apply this principle? What if there's Netzim Tam Gam? What if there's Shishim? What if there's all these things are going to come up? What if it's a Davar Choref, right? When do I apply not barnat? But I first want to understand the principle of not barnat. That's our objective today, to understand the principle, and then we'll learn the Siman, and we'll see when it's applicable. Follow? Okay. So
Just go back to the not kosher dish.
Let's finish that. Yes. So that's where I was. Right. So now everybody agrees, at least so far as we know, certainly the majority, that the leniency of not barnat does not apply to other Yisurim, which means if you took the hot fish, put it onto a non-kosher dish, and that non-kosher dish was used within the last 24 hours. So the fish absorbed non-kosher. That fish, if you put it into another dish, would transfer the non-kosher flavor if there's no 60 to the ratio. Then you took something from that dish, put it into another dish, it would again transfer. To quote the Ram, quote the Ran, l'chein la'olam, forever. Flavor, son of flavor, son of flavor, son of flavor, from dish to dish to dish to dish to dish to dish, the non-kosher would never disappear.
It makes sense because once it's deemed not kosher,
That was the point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
That when it comes to not kosher, because shame isser, that's the terminology, the halakha terminology, it's received designation of prohibition, it doesn't just magically disappear.
Right.
Unless you have a 60 to the ratio. So until you have 60 to the ratio where the flavor is overwhelmed, it doesn't disappear. Whereas when it comes to, well, it's machlokes whether or not it's daraisa or darabanan, whether biblically this non-kosher remains as a transfer from one to the next, or is that a rabbinic injunction? And that would be linked to Chanan. Do I apply Chanan by Shari Sudim? That would inform this question.
So till now,
Yeah.
we learned that Basar B'chalav is more stringent.
Otazai.
And here we're finding the opposite.
Exactly. That's what I was saying exactly at the beginning. That because Basar B'chalav are inherently kosher to begin with, when it comes to Chanan, it turns into astringency. Because in their mixture, they become prohibited. So the prohibition saturates every single square inch. I don't know, what's the word? Every molecule of this mixture is non-kosher. Because it's inherently the mixture, it's non-kosher.
It encapsulates it.
It encapsulates every single molecule. And thus the whole thing is Chanan. But here it's the reverse. Because nothing is not kosher, every single item here is totally kosher, the meat, the fish, and everything else. So it never acquired the designation of prohibition. Therefore, there's going to be a limitation on how far the flavor goes. And if it's not by not, if it's 2 degrees, not going to transfer into mutter. Clear? And when it comes to shari, so when it comes to other prohibitions, 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, forever. Again, the question is whether that forever by the other Yisurim is biblical or rabbinic. That's a machlokes, which is linked to the question of Chanan by shari Yisurim. But we'll close the brackets on that because that's complicated. Okay. We're clear? Clear so far? Not by not is a leniency specifically for milk and meat because there's no non-kosher flavor, and therefore, if it's 2 degrees removed, it does not transfer the flavor to the next item. So hot fish or hot eggs or anything that was parve, and you put it onto a fleshig dish, you can then have that cheese, those eggs with cheese later. Again, assuming the dish is completely clean, and the only issue is the flavor, and assuming the flavor was absorbed within the last 24 hours, and assuming that it's not davar chodav, all those things are going to come up in the siman, the limitations of the leniency of not by not. Okay. Now the question is, here's the real question. The Gemara's scenario was hot fish placed onto a meat dish, and then later eating this meat, this fish, with what's called kutach, which is a kind of biblical Babylonian butter of sorts, called kutach, mentioned in the Gemara quite often. It's a kind of spread that had milk in it, something like butter, but not exactly. The Gemara in a number of places gives different variations of recipes that may have resulted in kutach, and it seems like it's a milk-based dip, but you can flavor it with all kinds of other things. In some places in the Gemara, it seems like it's liquidy. In other cases in the Gemara, it seems like it's much more hard, like a spread. So it seems like it's a universal name used to describe dairy-based dips or spreads, but it could be mixed with other things. At any rate, that's the Gemara scenario. Hot fish put onto a meat dish, you can then have it later with your kutach, because it's not bar nut. Okay, now what happens if this fish was cooked in the meat dish? So there's no actual meat. The meat, there's no, it's only a flavor. So do I now say not by not? Why? Let's go through it. The meat, the flavor went from meat into dish, into the pot. 15 hours later, it's still within 24 hours. So 15 hours later, the pot is clean. Flavor is going out from dish into the cooked fish. Why is that not by not? It's against second degree. right? The Gemara didn't give us that case. The Gemara gave us a case where a hot fish went to a meat dish, but it wasn't cooked in the meat dish. But why doesn't the same logic also apply to cooking it in the meat dish? The flavor went from the meat into the cooked dish. It's now totally clean. It's just the flavor absorption in the walls of the pot, and then it went from the pot into the fish. Again, not by not. Again, 2 degrees. And indeed, there are those. In fact, it seems like it's the majority, Rambam, Ravya, Rashba, Ran, others, who say yes, indeed. And that's how the Shulchan Aruch rules. That not by not applies even if you cooked the fish in the pot.
With no meat in the
No
pot.
meat in the pot, just flavor.
Even
Right? Because not by not is a limitation on tam ki'ikr. Once you have ikr, it doesn't apply. It's only by tam ki'ikr. Right? If you have the item in there itself, then you can't apply not by not. Not by not is only when there's tam.
Yes.
Right? Only flavor. So it's a completely clean pot. But there's flavor of meat that was absorbed in the last 24 hours.
What's the first piece?
Yeah.
The first case was where you had the Gemara's case,
Yeah.
where you had hot fish and you put it onto a dairy dish, but that fish wasn't cooked on this meat. I'm sorry, hot fish put onto a meat dish, but the fish wasn't cooked in the meat dish.
But the meat dish is cold?
Okay, let's just say it's hot. Okay, it's cold.
If it's hot, it's like the second case.
What?
If it's hot, it's like the second case.
Maybe. Let's say it's cold. Yeah.
Oh, it's cold. Okay.
Then what? I'm saying
Yeah.
right, but it's absorbing still from that thing.
But the whole idea is that heat transfers flavor. If you're putting a cold piece of fish that's kosher on a non-kosher plate, which is, let's say, made out of stainless steel and it's cold,
Yeah.
then where's the isser?
That's what we're saying, not by not.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. It's that matanat.
But there's no transference of flavor with no heat.
There is heat because it's hot fish.
So you're saying the item itself,
The fish was hot.
so the fish is hot and it goes on a cold plate.
Yeah,
But
it's
then you
absorbing
have-
from there.
But then you have tata gavar.
Okay, not necessarily with gush. Okay, that's a good question.
Talk about that one.
So it's like
One second.
every situation you mention seems to contradict a lot of the other.
One second.
Yeah.
He doesn't discuss if the plate is hot or cold. I'm assuming it's cold.
Well,
I don't think it matters.
Right.
I don't think it matters.
So where's the transference of flavor if the plate is clean and it's cold?
I'm sorry. Where's the transference?
You're saying not bar not means the flavor's not a flavor,
Yeah,
which means that if a non-kosher plate was used within 24 hours.
yeah, and I put a hot
find that
fish
it
on
was
it.
down, and now you put hot fish on it. Doesn't the halacha or doesn't the principle of tata gavar take precedence now that because the bottom is cold, so the cold overpowers?
Even so,
Doesn't
still,
cook.
even if you took that, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question because it doesn't mention
Isn't
more
Tata
about.
Gavar isn't Tata Gavar just by food? And
No,
we learned
tatagav. What do we say about tatagav by dishes?
It's that the lower
We
overpowers.
did by
different.
dishes also.
If the lower overpowers and the lower is cold, then you put a hot place on it. It has the status of kli sheni, not kli rishon. Which means it
No,
doesn't
it's
have
even
the
if it's
power to
cold. It's
cook.
even if it's cold. It's even if it's cold.
So tata gavar does not apply to
Even if it does, you would still be absorbing anyway a certain amount.
And maybe you're gonna say it's also maybe it's liquidy or something that kind of like it.
No, if it's liquid, then you have more reason to be lenient because it's only kedei klipa, and if you can't do klipa, then you're in this battle to begin with. Okay, good question. I don't know. That's a good question. But
fish
either way,
you
we
could
take the leniency
do,
anyway.
you could
Right, we're
remove
not
the
treating it.
klipa.
Sorry,
You could remove the klipa.
in theory, from the fish, yeah.
And then the other thing that I asked before is that if you're taking a plate that's clean that had non-kosher meat on it, completely non-kosher.
It was,
But it-
no,
but
non-kosher meat was cooked in it.
Yeah, but now it's clean. It's been clean.
Yeah.
It's within 24 hours.
Yeah,
And now you take this hot piece of fish and it falls on your plate. Does the idea of removing a klipa
doesn't say anything about that. No.
so it's completely forbidden?
Here, okay. So 1 second. The discussion here is not going to be non-kosher. Here, the discussion is going to be milk and meat.
But then it gets to the point.
I'm
of
giving you
whether
the din.
it's
1
permissible
second. I'm giving you the din of shara surim for background, but it's not to make the contrast between milk and meat and why the leniency applies to milk and meat rather than other isurim. But here, the discussion is not going to be other isurim. We're not going to discuss non-kosher dishes. I'm just telling you that not bar not, which we're going to be learning about now, is limited to basar b'chalav. Does not apply to non-kosher things. So the question of non-kosher dishes are not going to come up in the sim. I'm only just telling you that to give you the background as to why it applies to basar b'chalav. Because basar b'chalav never had the designation prohibited. But it's a good question about the tag over. The Gemara doesn't seem to mention anything.
But then you also have the idea of batal b'shishi, the piece of fish.
Okay, that for sure is applied.
60 times
That will come up. That will come
the-
up. Not necessarily though. That will definitely come up, but not necessarily. We already learned before that very rarely do you have a pot, items in a pot that's 60 times the ratio of the wall.
But we just learned last
Right.
week that if you filled a pot that had meat residue on it with
Yeah.
milk, that
Now
the milk
residue something
had-
else. Residue something
Ah,
else.
okay.
Right. Here's flavor. Rarely do you have content of the pot 60 times the ratio of the walls itself. Unless you have a huge pot with very thin walls. I mentioned that already last week, right?
Mhm.
So that's almost never. At any rate, okay, but that will come up in the Shulchan Aruch if you can know for sure that it's limited. That's limited by 60. Okay. All right. So now where were we? Okay. So now the question becomes: does not apply to when parve is cooked in fleshik? The Gemara's case was where you took hot parve and you put it on a flesh on a meat dish, and there we said not barnat. The same thing apply when you're cooking the parve in the meat pot. So there's a meat pot that was used within the last 24 hours. I now cook a fish in it. So I can say the same thing. It goes 1 degree is into the pot, out of the pot. And degree 2 is into the fish, out of the fish, even though it happens to be cooking in the pot. And indeed, many apply the not by not leniency there too. And there's a Shulchan Aruch. What you mean? If you follow the law of the Shulchan Aruch, you can take fish that was cooked in a meat dish and eat it with cheese. That would be the Shulchan Aruch's rule.
What about if you take the cheese and you make it hot and then put it on the fish?
It wouldn't make a difference.
It's just allowed.
It wouldn't make a difference, yeah, because it's 2 degree removed. It went from the meat into the pot, from the pot into the fish, and now you can have it with cheese, even though the fish was cooked in the pot. It's still 2 degrees removed. That is the view of the Beis Yosef and many other, taken from many Rishonim. The other view on the more stringent side is no. Once you introduce cooking, it's like the flavor itself is there. Like once you're cooking in this pot, then all the flavor in the pot is not 2nd degree; it's 1st degree because this pot is a mixture of all the flavors, including the flavor that was in the pot. And then when you cook the fish, it's absorbing 1st degree meat, even though there's no meat present. But because meat flavor was cooked in there within the last 24 hours, it's part of the full stew. And therefore, following this view, which is the view of the Rama, yeah, that if you cook fish in a meat dish, you cannot have that fish with cheese. This is the big difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim in this regard till this very day.
The Sephardim don't.
So how do we paskin?
We follow Rama.
Yeah.
We follow Rama, obviously. Us Ashkenazim.
But Sephardim don't typically mix cheese and fish.
Okay, so that's not cheese; it's vegetables.
Right. Okay.
Same difference. You're cooking vegetables in a fleshik dish. Following the Shulchan Aruch, you can have cheese with those vegetables. Following Rama, you cannot, because it's not barnat, because it was actually cooked in the dish. However, it says there are Shulchan Aruch Rama, b'di'evet, post factum, rely on the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so it's not quite clear what post factum is, and that's going to become a discussion in the commentaries of Shach and others. What exactly does post factum mean? Does it mean post factum when you already cooked it in the meat dish?
Like you cooked it and you
Or does
decided you
post
wanna-
factum mean you already cooked in the meat dish, or does post factum mean you already took those vegetables and put cheese on it? It's going to be a discussion exactly what that means.
Or you cooked your vegetables one day and now you're cooking yourself cheese and you decide that you want to put them together as
Okay.
they were cooked
So at
separately.
which point is
Now
the
you
post
can-
factum? You already cooked it, or is post factum you already mixed it? Yeah,
You were
That's gonna be
allowed to cook the fish in the fleshik pot.
no problem.
So
But-
b'di'evet would have to only be when you're adding the cheese.
Okay, that's one view.
How could you say b'di'evet, you cook the thing because it's permitted already? to
Because the
cook fish
prohibition might
in the
be
pot,
according to
in the
some,
pot that
according
was
to some,
used
the
for milchik within the same time.
Yeah. So the prohibition according to some is you shouldn't to begin with cook vegetables in a fleshik dish knowing you're going to use it with cheese. But once you cooked it in the fleshik dish, it's already too far flavored and you have it with cheese. No. There are those who say that. But if you intentionally cook the vegetables because you want to have cheese with it tomorrow, that's already not allowed. There are those who put that limitation. So the b'di'evet in the Ramah is not quite clear, and there's going to be twice the b'di'evet in the Ramah that isn't clear. It's going to be discussed in the other commentaries. So keep our eyes open for that. Now there's a third view. Okay, so view number 1 is not barnat is across the board. Anytime it's 2 degree flavor, even if the second flavor comes through cooking. Right? So you cook the fish in the meat pot, it's not barnat. Shulchan Aruch. Rama, taking the stringent at least chatchila, that when you're cooking a parve dish in a fleshik pot, it is itself fleshik. At least the chatchila, because the flavor that's in the wall is part of your stew. It's not considered a second degree flavor. There's a third view which says there's a difference between cooking versus grilling, meaning cooking with liquid versus
Roasting, yeah.
roasting or grilling, where it's direct contact with the pot. So if I fried the fish without any oil, then I would say no, not by not, because direct contact with the flavor that's in that pot, no good. But if I boiled it in water and the flavor is 2-degree moved because it goes through the water, then I do say not by not.
So cooking is actually more.
That's a third view, which is not mentioned in the Ramah or the Shulchan Aruch, but it's going to be mentioned as a sniff. It can be sometimes used as a combined reason to be lenient, to follow that view when cooking versus grilling. Okay. This is really the main, everything I just said till now is really what you need to know to understand the Siman. If you understand this well, everything in the Siman will make sense. All of the items will be understood. There's another discussion, not mentioned directly in the Shulchan Aruch. I don't know if it's on the side, but it should be on the side of your stuff, which is, so far clear? Yeah, okay. So the next discussion is, which is not directly in the Shulchan Aruch, but it's relevant to know, especially as we come on Wednesday when we do our Chazar L'maisa. I want to touch on this because it's going to be relevant, which is, what's the order of not bar not? The order of not bar not that we did now is dish to food. Those are my 2 degrees. So the flavor first went into the actual pot, and then from the pot into the food. What if it was the other way around? It went into food and then into pot. So I cooked fish with meat. I know fish with meat I wouldn't. I cooked vegetables with meat. Yeah. Now I take out those vegetables and I saute them on a pan. So the pan now absorbs meat, but by 2 degrees. From meat to vegetable, and then from vegetable to dish, to pan. The scenario we gave till now was the meat went to pan and then to food to the fish. Here's the other way around. It went into the food, and then from the food into the dish, into the pan. Does the pan now also transfer meat flavor to the next thing it's going to cook on it?
But if it was a parve pan
It was a parve pan.
and that was used for meat, then
It wasn't used for meat.
24 hours.
It wasn't used for meat. Again, you're throwing another variable. Don't throw in the 24 hours. It's all within 24 hours because otherwise you're throwing another variable. You want to know if we can rely on not by not.
So not by not, it's always within 24
Of course, it has to be within 24 hours.
Never-
If it's not within 24 hours, then you're already doing not by not. It's not that leniency. You're relying on the next in time of God leniency. Shulchan Aruch is going to mention that, right? So again, you have vegetables that were cooked with meat. Take those vegetables, fry them on a pan. So it's also not by not. Meat. Flavor went from meat into vegetables, from vegetables into pan. Does that pan now turn the next thing into fleshik? Into meat? That's going to be a machlekes as well in the commentaries around the Shulchan Aruch. If not by not is specifically that the first flavor absorption is through a dish and then into food, or even if it goes from food and then to dish, that's going to be a machlekes as well. And to the best of my knowledge, that machlekes persists till today. And those who follow Ramah are going to steer stringence here, because we treat cooking as if it's full transference. So you're cooking that vegetable in a pan, it's full transference. It's not considered in a second degree. It's only a second degree when to begin with it's in a pan. And then without cooking, it goes from the pan to a hot dish. But once you introduce cooking, according to the Ramah, you're reactivating the whole thing. It's no longer a second degree. So those who follow the Ramah are going to be stringent. And if I remember correctly, I wrote this down here. I think the Yalkut Yosef is lenient here. So he would allow, for example, putting cheese barekas directly onto a urn that doesn't have meat in it, but that will be used with meat.
Like a cholent pot?
Well, if there's meat in it, no. But if let's say there's a hot water, and then that hot water is going to be used for meat, because the flavor from the cheese is going from cheese to bareka, that's one, and from bareka to urn, too far removed, and then that water could be had with meat, no problem.
How would you be warming that up on an urn? I don't understand. Usually
You take the bareka and you put it on an urn, on top of an urn.
Yeah, but it's on top.
Okay, so it's going cheese to dough from dough to dish, to urn. And then that urn doesn't become milk, according to the Yalkut Yosef, in any way, because it's 2 degrees. But that's only if you believe that 2 degree can begin in food. In other words, is the dough itself considered dairy? And therefore it's a 1 degree transference from the dough to the urn? Or is it considered 2nd degree? Because it's from dairy to meat, to dough, and from dough to urn, for example. Okay, again, more details on that when we get to halacha l'maisa. Finally, our last point that's going to be discussed in the Shulchan Aruch is, and this is going to play out how we understand what to do with dishwashers. Because the question now is, if I can have, let's say I have milk, the scenario in the Shulchan Aruch is going to be, the scenario in the Shulchan Aruch should be understood as not the scenario of a dishwasher. Actually, you know what? Exercise. Read through there's 2 different scenarios in the Shulchan Aruch, and you'll tell me which one is our dishwasher, and which one you think would be our dishwasher. There's 3 actually in the Shulchan Aruch. Number 1, the Shulchan Aruch discusses meat pot, dairy pot, both used within the last 24 hours. No substance, just flavor. And they're cooked together, or they're washed together in hot water.
In a dishwasher?
There's no dishwashers in the time of the
No,
Shulchan Aruch.
I know.
So that's what I'm saying. I'm going to give you the scenarios of the Shulchan Aruch. You'll tell me which one applies to the dishwasher. They're both putting it. They're both. They're being cooked together. They're being cleaned together in hot water.
Yeah.
Is there transfer flavor, or do I say not by not? It's from the dish to the water, from the water to the dish,
No, because it's all together.
or is it all together?
Yes.
What's the other way around? What if I have a dairy pot filled with boiling hot water, and then I wash a hot meat dish in it?
That's different.
Do I say also it's 2 degree from the pot to the water, from the water to the pot, or not? Scenario 1. Scenario 2. I'm pouring from, and now it's pouring. I'm pouring from a hot meat dish, hot water, onto a hot milk pan to clean it out. So I'm pouring water to clean out my meat, my dairy dish, which has no substance of actual dairy, but it's dairy.
It was just used to boil the water.
Now I use that meat dish to boil the water.
Umbrella, basically.
Meat pot to boil. I use the meat pot to boil the water, and I poured it on top of the dairy pan.
You're not allowed.
Scenario number 2.
Continuous
Scenario number
stream
3.
or broken stream?
Sorry,
No.
Continuous
that's
stream or
discussed in the
broken
Ramah.
stream?
Very good. Very good. The Ramah is going to make that point. Is the stream broken or unbroken? Yes, that's going to come up. Okay.
Because if
Scenario-
it's not broken, it's like the heat of a kli rishon.
Oh.
And if it's broken, then it's like the heat of a kli sheni.
The Ramah is going to discuss that. Scenario number 3 is I'm pouring hot water from a Parve source onto milk and meat dishes.
Together or separate?
I'm just pouring onto it. So is there even
That's Hagala.
No, it's not a gullah.
Hagala, sorry.
No, it's not a gullah. It's Erie, but
Eruv.
it's from a Parve source, which
Are
would be
they
basically
splashing from one to the other?
Sorry,
Are they splashing from one to the other?
let's just say they are.
But
Isn't that the same as if they were contained in the hot
a non-kosher-
water?
One second. What did I say?
Isn't that the same as like your first case where you said they were washed together in hot water?
So in the first case,
How is that different?
you can make the case that they're cooking together in the same water. You cannot say that they're cooking together because I'm pouring power of a hot water on top of both of them. They're not cooking together. In the
You
case
say
of
they're splashing. They're splashing
okay,
from one
is
to
that
another.
enough? Is that enough to cause cooking to the point that it's going to transfer flavor from one to the other? In the case of the water, for example, I'm going to say like this: the water itself absorbed both milk and meat, and then when the water itself absorbed both milk and meat, it goes back into the 2 pots. I can say that when they're both being put into water together. I cannot say that when it comes to splashing, that the water being poured on top of it is absorbing both milk and meat, and then that absorption of milk and meat from the water going back into the pots. Very difficult to imagine that when I'm pouring it on top.
I think it's more to do with
That's probably kosher tower dishwashers,
Mhm.
where the source is not meat or dairy. Right? Probably. We'll have to wait for Wednesday to see more details. And then the 4th variable the Shulchan Aruch is going to mention is soap. Now, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention soap directly. The Shulchan Aruch mentions afar, which is, again, we mentioned before that they used to use ash or earth, as a cleaning as a cleaning solution. So the Shulchan Aruch says, throw that in, and it turns your flavor to gum. It turns your flavor negative. But is that true? Because what was the scenario that we learned Neshim Tam of Gam in the previous Siman inside the Gimel? What was this Neshim Tam of Gam we learned originally inside the Gimel? Where the flavor was left out 24 hours. So where's the detrimental flavor in the first scenario? Where the flavor itself became detrimental because it was left for 24 hours. In this case, the food itself isn't detrimental. You're throwing on an agent that's detrimental. Does an external agent have the capacity to turn the food itself detrimental? What if I was capable of scientifically removing them? Would the food be detrimental? No. So not everybody agrees with the Shulchan Aruch's position that throwing in soap will cause the food to become
Well, that's what I mean.
detrimental.
I raised this question, I think, a week or two ago when I mentioned the Yalkut Yosef on this, which is that he allows for the same dishwasher to be used between milk and meat.
So there are two components to this dishwasher. Number one, you have soap. You have the Shulchan Aruch's view that soap does cause negative flavor, even though it's from an external source. And number two, here's the main point, which is why even Ashkenazim would be lenient, maybe not in the first instance, but post factum certainly. Because what's the source of hot water? Parve. Now you're expecting a flying around water to absorb simultaneously from milk and meat and then give that milk and meat back to the dishes? Does the Ramah expect such a far nice and time of not by not? It's an extremely far not by not. It's the flavor, it's a part of the source, absorbing from both milk and meat, and then giving back to those milk and meat dishes, the mixed flavor that it had.
And the water spraying.
And the water spraying. It's either clear issue, but it's either from part of the source. So there's no steady anything that absorbs both milk and meat that can then transfer that milk and meat flavor to the other thing. So even though, let's say the Shulchan Aruch, the Yaakov Joseph might say lenient in the first instance, because you have the soap element, but it's possible that a mum might even be allowed in post factum for sure, but maybe even the first instance, but not necessarily, as we'll see, God willing, on Wednesday.
Well, I know
But these are all the principles that can come up, all based on the first principle, not by not. So you have to understand how far degrees the flavor absorption, and what are the agents causing those degrees of separation. If it's 1 degree separation, meat to pot, pot to food. Okay, it went. But now you're expecting it to go from that thing to the next thing? And what were the agents? Was the agent's heat? Was the agent cooking? Is the agent an external source of hot water? And whether or not all those degrees of separation are enough to say that the flavor is no longer tam ke'ikr, and therefore it's totally fine.
But
Or the agent is strong enough that the flavor does transfer.
But all these cases we're talking about b'diavad, right? We're not. None of
Yes
these
and
are
no.
chola.
Oh, that's a good point. Because the Ramah again is going to say b'diavad. He's going to say twice b'diavad, the Ramah. And the question is, what do he mean by b'diavad? And in which cases is he saying b'diavad? It's not 100% clear from the Ramah, and that's going to become a discussion on the side of exactly where are the cases where he says don't do it, but if you did it, it's okay, and where are the cases where he says not so far degree you can do it to begin with. That's going to become a discussion as well. Certainly in the Ramah, which mentions twice b'diavad, each case not being clear, and the same thing in the Shulchan Aruch. Another variable is sharp flavors. Sharp flavors, as we're going to learn in Tzaddik Vav, have the capacity to reawaken negative flavor. Does it have that same capacity? Not by not. Where a flavor that was weakened because it's 2 degrees removed, can it be reinvigorated thanks to spice? In the
That's
same
going
way-
back to the fish.
Back to the
Going
fish.
right back to the fish.
Yes, so spicy fish
First
will
what's
change
out.
the scenario. Because now the spice in that fish has the capacity to reinvigorate the flavor that it absorbed.
the negative flavor.
Even negative flavor.
Right.
Yeah. So that's gonna be this
Because
Siman.
meat doesn't have a sharpness to it.
Meat itself doesn't know, so it
Yeah,
has to be
because it
external
makes
sharpness. Yeah. Okay. And the exact definition of what constitutes sharp is going to come in Tzaddik Vav.
Yeah.
But for now, we're just going to say sharp, assuming it qualifies based on 96th Tzaddik Vav, which you're going to get to, I think, even after our next test, we get to Tzaddik Vav, I think, because we're learning Tzaddik K this week. Next 2, maybe even 3 weeks, Tzaddik Dalet test, and then Tzaddik Vav. Yeah. So in other words, our test this time is going to be on the most practical stuff. I used the wrong pot. I put a part of a thing into a fleishik dish or a meat dish. I use the wrong ladle. That's going to be our whole test now, which is going to be, what is it? To the Gimel, to the Dalet, to the K.
Okay, and so the tests are not
Actually.
it's not cumulative, right? So it's going to be on the.
No, just on these 3.
Yeah, okay.
The Gimel, to the Dalet, to the K. That's it.
Okay.
It's going to be the next. I think it's the next test. Maybe Tzaddik Vav also, but I don't think so. I think Tzaddik Vav is going to be the next.
Pay Zion also pay Zion and pay.
I'm not going to be re-asked. No,
No,
that's just,
no, it's just only be on. It's not going to be. No, you pay Zion. We did after the test. We did pay
The
Zion.
test-
oh, it's going to be Zion also. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
It's true. Separation between milk and meat is also going to become part of this test, which is also very practical. It is the most practical set of halachas is this test.
Yeah.
Separation of milk and meat and using the wrong dishes for the wrong thing. And the question of parva being used in milk and meat dishes, vice versa.
Yeah.
Okay. So the essence of it is not bar not, 2 degree flavor, as a leniency and limitations of that leniency.
So the first test we had three Simanim to review. The second one we had 7 to review, but they're easy ones, like you said. That's more.
They're more practical, and also again, these things build, right? Because once you know certain principles, they build on each other, right? You don't have to review Tom Kicker. We know what that is, right? You don't have to review Kavish Kumavishal. We know what that is, right? These principles are already built. Now we're building new ones. Okay, wonderful week. Can
Can I bring
learning.
a practical case?
Yeah.
Can I bring a practical case? Okay, we have in our shul only a fleshik kitchen, all right? And we want to make breakfast.
Okay.
So we have a Parve frying pan to make the eggs, right?
Okay.
But it's on a fleshik oven. Of course, the oven's clean, no question.
Can you have those eggs with cheese?
Can you have those eggs with cheese?
That's going to get to the question of lechatchila and b'diavad.
So hold on a second.
Can you make not banat lechatchila,
Right.
knowing you're frying those eggs for
Right.
cheese? Assuming
Right.
that was used in the last 24 hours, because Sunday morning breakfast, I know it was used on Shabbos.
No, but he said the.
Okay, practically it wasn't really used in the last 24
But that's
hours.
going to be the question of
Nothing
lechatchila
was
b'diavad.
used in the last
Sorry?
24 hours. Practically nothing was used in the last 24 hours.
Assume, let's say it was. Even if it wasn't, because right? That's going to become a
Well,
question.
there's onion in the,
Okay.
let's say you're frying it with onion. So
What does that?
onions is sharp and we're going to have that also. But the,
Okay.
but the-
Okay, that's going to come up in Tzaddik Vav,
frying
whether
pan
onions qualify
never
as sharp
used for
and
anything
to
except
what.
para. Sorry.
Yeah. So Tzaddik Vav, we're going to discuss whether onions count as sharp and when they count as sharp. That's going to be in Tzaddik Vav. But yes, that's exactly our question this week. And that's going to come to the question of lechatchila and b'diavad. And when you could say not banat lechatchila, when you can't say not banat lechatchila. That's going to be our question. And what constitutes lechatchila? That's going to be this question that will come up, God willing.
Good.
Okay. Have a good week, everybody. Tzlach Rabbeinu learning.